Hello, I'm James Fitzsimons and welcome to the Career Scoop, a podcast all about career progression, advice and experiences aimed at assisting those who are in career transition. Today my guest is Colin Judge. Colin is someone who has spent his life constantly defying the odds. Despite being born with no legs and one arm, Colin is now a Paralympic Table Tennis Player, motivational speaker and actuarial analyst. The teenage Colin struggled to come to terms with his disability, but once he found table tennis, everything changed. He started to accept himself for who he was and began to excel in all areas of his life. He made his international debut 4 years later while studying for his Leaving Certificate. Colin is the current European champion, 6 times Irish national champion, and has won numerous international titles around the world. His next big goal is to qualify for Tokyo 2021. Colin, I'm delighted to welcome you to the show.
Hi, James. Thanks very much for having me.
Now, first of all, the first question I have to ask you, I saw you on the Late Late Show last Friday night. It was great to see you there. You're obviously a superstar now. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? And did you get Ryan's autograph?
Yes, James. Yeah, I was very surprised to have been asked to be on the Late Late Show last week. Very grateful for the opportunity. Really enjoyed the experience. I was a little bit nervous, I suppose, at first. It was a bit of a long wait. I suppose in a normal world, we'd be chilling in the green room for an hour or two beforehand and, you know, maybe having a few settlers, but there was none of that this time. And so I was waiting in the changing room with my dad and I was thinking through every single eventuality. But when I got out there, I think I enjoyed it. It came across quite well. And, you know, I'm very happy that me and my teammates from the Paralympic team got a little bit of exposure.
That's great. And bring us an update where you are on your journey to Tokyo.
Yeah, so at the moment, things are obviously still a little bit up in the air, but I have a qualification tournament in June, 3rd of June, which I'm hoping goes ahead. And so that competition, I'll hopefully seal my place for Tokyo 2021. There's also 5 wildcards, so they're kind of random selections after that tournament. So I'm 2 places off at the minute and there's 6 places left. So I'd like to think my chances are still pretty good. But then, yeah, we would be leaving in July. So it's a very quick turnaround. And I suppose it's a long wait until June. But the Paralympics start mid-August. And yeah, it's my dream to be there. It's all I've been thinking about really for the last 18 months. So yeah, I really hope that I get my opportunity on the big stage.
And what people might know is that you're a trained actuary, you worked with KPMG, you took sabbatical out, and you're now a professional athlete. But you may bring the listeners back just to who you are, who's Colin, and your journey to become a para-athlete. And
yeah,
Olympic champion, hopefully.
In the future, I hope, yes. So I was born with 3 missing limbs, which was obviously, I suppose, what I always say about my disability is I wasn't very aware of it in the beginning, and so I think the burden was placed on my parents at the start. It was quite difficult for them to deal with, but I think they did an incredible job at setting me up in life and giving me a foundation. And I think that's really, really stood to me. There has been a lot of difficult times along the way. My teenage years in particular, I found it quite difficult to cope with my disability. I went to an able-bodied school, St. Michael's College, Ireland's premier rugby school, as I said on the Late Late Show. Ryan didn't like it. But yeah, look, my friends all started playing rugby. And I suppose at that stage, then I realized there was a lot of things that I couldn't do. And back then, I didn't have very much confidence in myself either, which made dealing with my disability even more difficult. So I knew that I needed to change something, and finding sport was probably the best way that I had to deal with my disability. And so when I discovered table tennis, I never looked back. It was the first time in my life that I had a passion and a drive, and something that made me realize that for all the things that I couldn't do, that there was a lot that I could do. And I think all the successes that I've achieved in table tennis has definitely translated to other areas in my life. And I've never really looked back since then.
Wow, what do you mean? You're a European champion, you're 6 times national champion. What other accolades am I missing? How many countries, like in the last 2 years, how many countries have you traveled to?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I've been all over the world, James, and it's been I've been very lucky, and I wonder, table tennis has given me so many great opportunities. I suppose just to take you back, it wasn't always easy in the beginning, even though it was the only sport that I could beat my brother at. Becoming a table tennis player wasn't so easy with one limb. I didn't really have a role model or anyone to look up to. And my peers passed me out very quickly, which was probably the most difficult thing that I had to deal with. I love table tennis and I worked so hard at it. And you see kids that you're friends with that aren't even that much into it and they're beating you, it's quite tough to take. And I think the first thing that I realized about table tennis was that I was going to have to work harder. I was at a disadvantage and I needed to make up for it somehow. But that hard work never scared me, and I kept pursuing my goals no matter what the obstacles that I encountered. And yeah, look, I started to win medals then after a while. They were usually bronze, but I was very grateful of them at the time. And yeah, then around 2016, I started to find a bit of form. I won my first 2 competitions, and 3 months later, I was preparing for my first European Championships. And yeah, I remember taking that summer off, missing the lads' holiday to EOS, which I was annoyed about at the time. But I worked really hard and put everything into it. And finally, I got my reward. The competition didn't go very well at the start. I lost a match, but I pursued. In the face of adversity, I just kind of forgot about all the pressure that was on my shoulders. My coach sat me down and I gave it my all. And yeah, the next thing I knew, I was on the podium and listening to the Irish national anthem. And I knew then that all the hard work and sacrifices I'd made were worth it, and that I'd do absolutely everything in my power to recreate the feeling that I felt that day.
Wow, that's a great story. What can you share with people now younger people now? You're only 25, Colin. Not only 25, I think you're probably 50 in the sense of in your resilience years. What would you say to people, your peers, a couple of years younger, who are kind of pandemic is upsetting them? How might they reframe it in their mind and move forward? Because you every day is a journey for you, I would presume.
Yeah. I think resilience is a very important thing to me. It's something that I've had to have from a very young age, and I think it's a word that's thrown around a lot these days. So I suppose resilience, from my point of view, would be thriving in adversity. Ignoring the outside noise and pursuing your goals or whatever that it is that you're trying to achieve, no matter what the obstacles are. And there's been a lot of times in my life where I've had to do that. From a young age, learning to get dressed. I often tell the story of how my mum left out the shirt and tie on my bed every morning, and how I couldn't even dress myself every morning for 3 years. But eventually, having tried it and failed it about 500 times, I was finally able to do it. And then later in life, dealing with my disability in the teenage years and finding sport. There's been a lot of difficult times along the way, but I've always tried to pursue my goals, no matter who told me that it wasn't possible, or no matter how many failures that I had along the way. I learned to make failure my friend and pursue my dreams, no matter what the chances of me achieving them were. Any time that I failed at something, I always learned, and I failed a different way the next time. And that's pretty much the way that I've lived my life. And, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we're all on a journey, and I'm hopeful that in the end, I'll get to where I want to go to.
Wow. And respectfully, can you tell me any funny failures?
Funny failures? Let me, I think, my first international competition is a good example of a complete failure, and this was back when I was 14 or 15, and I thought that I was a very good table tennis player. I could beat all the lads in St. Michael's at this stage, and they were able-bodied. So I thought, these wheelchair lads in France, they're not going to be much good. But I was very wrong. At this stage, I'd been to a few international camps, and I'd met the Germans and the French, and I didn't think they were all that great. I remember being very annoyed. They used to call me a tourist, because I was from Ireland and I had a funny technique. But I was very desperate to prove them wrong at this competition. But it was a failure, as you said. I lost all my matches in style, and I remember I've been finished on day 2 of the competition, and my dad traveled with me because it was my first time away. And I think then the next day we went to see the Eiffel Tower and the Champs-Elysees. So the Germans were proof right that I was a tourist for that tournament, that's for sure. But it was a failure. But as I said, I always learned, and that competition was probably one of the most important competitions that I went to. It was the first time that I really felt motivated to become better. It was the first time I'd seen guys with disabilities similar to myself playing a very, very high level, like a lot better than me. And then, reflecting on the competition, I thought, if they can do it, why can't I? I have no excuse. I never had anyone to compare myself to, but now I did. I felt that, their level was within my reach. And, that's pretty much where my career took off after that. And so, it wasn't funny at the time. It was funny looking back, and it was a failure. But I definitely learned from it, and the lessons that I learned have definitely stood to me today.
And so that's the kind of a funny failure per se. And I suppose, did it teach you that I have the ability, but I just need to step up a little bit? I need to get my mind in the right place. I need to practice technique, because that's where these guys and girls are. They're just at a slightly different level.
Yeah, of course. As I said to you there, I thought that I was a brilliant table tennis player, and I thought that I was working hard. But then when I heard, the story, it wasn't just seeing them play. It was, hearing what they had to say about themselves as well. I started learning, how to practice properly, like playing for fun during PE for an hour in the week is not really training. Focusing on different aspects of your game and doing that continuously again and again and again. No matter how much you don't like it. I used to only play matches. I used to only really play for fun. And, I thought that once I was on the table hitting balls, that was good enough. And I quickly learned that it wasn't. And so, I needed to step it up. Table tennis is obviously a minority sport in Ireland. And so there's not very much knowledge about table tennis. And so it was when I traveled that I learned the most. And I found no excuse for myself after that. I was very determined to, try and start training like the guys did there. And I felt that if I did that, there'd be no reason why I couldn't get to their level. Because I did have a talent. I always knew that. And I had a good brain, and I used everything that I've got. But I wasn't prepared for that competition. And I knew that it's like what Roy Keane used to say, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And I learned that. Since then, I've always tried to prepare for everything in the best way possible.
Okay. And you went to UCD and you studied actuarial science, I think, and then you're on sabbatical from KPMG. So you're an actuary who's 3 to 4 years, and now you're a professional athlete. Do you want to bring us through that transition from in an office to not in an office?
Yeah, an unusual one, I suppose. Well, firstly, I'd like to say that I'm very lucky to have been given the opportunity to work for KPMG. They've been hugely supportive of me, and I've made a lot of great friends while working there. It was definitely a steep learning curve at times. There were certain periods that I was under a lot of pressure, and I was thrown in the deep end, and I was really struggling, to be honest. But I always tried to pursue with that, and I always learned from it. And I think that foundation that they gave me will definitely stand to me in whatever path that I take after the Paralympics. And I suppose during 2018, I realized that working 50, 60 hours a week and trying to study on top of that and play table tennis, I was never going to reach my potential as an athlete. And at the end of the day, that was probably what was most important to me. And I could see Tokyo 2020 on the horizon. I just missed Rio, the Rio Paralympic Games in 2016 by one place. And I felt that a big reason why I missed Rio was because I didn't commit, that I was kind of too engrossed in my studies in UCD. And, you know, I was trying to get a first, and I didn't train as much as I could have. And I didn't attend as much competitions as I should have. And I promised myself that I'd never make that mistake again. And, you know, I suppose from a young age, table tennis has been more than a sport to me. And, you know, I've always felt that I owe it to myself and to the sport to give it absolutely everything. And, you know, I've always made myself the promise that I would never retire without throwing the kitchen sink at it, without giving it absolutely everything. And so with all that in mind, I made the tough decision, and it was a very tough decision. I know a lot of my friends in KPMG slag me for taking the easy route and getting away from the finance world, but it would have been much easier for me to stay in KPMG. I was getting a lot more comfortable than I was when I first started. I felt that I was getting better at actuarial, even though I'm sure there's some of them that would disagree. I was learning the ropes, and it was a really good job, and I was very happy there. But as I said, the most important thing to me was reaching my best level in table tennis. And so I made the decision. I went on sabbatical in April 2019, and I haven't looked back since then. I've no regrets. I haven't reached a lot of the goals that I've set out for myself, but I've traveled all around the world, from China, Germany, America. I've been very lucky to travel to these countries and learn, and I feel I've come on a very long way. And yeah, I'm currently on the cusp of qualification for Tokyo 2021 now. It's obviously been postponed by a year, but I'm feeling better prepared than I ever would have been for Tokyo 2020. And yeah, I'm still working every day trying to make my dream a reality.
Okay. And you're also developed a side job as a motivational speaker. And
yes,
do you want to share a little bit about this, the companies you've worked for, and also just kind of the themes you've been talking about, and some of them I think are very relevant to where we are as a community at the moment?
Yeah, well, I suppose motivational speaking is something that I've always wanted to do. Because as I said, when I first started playing table tennis, I didn't really have a role model or anybody to look up to. And I know that it would have made my life so much easier back then if I could have looked at somebody else with a disability and someone else achieving big things. And, you know, that would have given me the confidence to go out and do those things myself. But I never had that. And that's why in my teenage years that I really I hit rock bottom, I suppose, and I didn't really have too much hope for myself. And so I feel through the motivational speaking, obviously, I think my story, it can be applicable. You know, the lessons that I've learned, I suppose, they can be applicable to anyone. But I suppose the disability and that sort of issue it's something that's very close to my heart. And you know, if there's one boy with a disability that sees my story and is motivated and inspired by that, I think it would mean the world to me. And so I think that's the reason why I do motivational speaking, is because, you know, I know what it's like to feel down, to not have any confidence in yourself, and to not know what the best way forward is. And it's one of my big goals in life, is to share my story, some of the obstacles that I've encountered and overcome, and hopefully inspire people to be the best version of themselves.
Wow. And the companies you've worked with?
Companies, yes. Well, I'm currently working with Google. So they're a big one at the moment. I've another talk with them actually in 2 hours' time. So I'm talking with them. I've obviously talked to Elevate. That was probably one of my first talks and one of my most enjoyable ones. I've talked with Accenture, Zendesk, Allianz. I've talked to a number of different schools, St. Michael's College and Marian College. I've those two on Friday. And yeah, I've talked to a number of different junior schools as well before the coronavirus. But I'm very lucky to have had the opportunity to talk to those different companies. I really enjoy it. I'm still improving and kind of learning the best way to communicate my story. It seems like an easy thing to do, and I thought that it would be, but it's actually quite difficult when it comes down to it. And I still have a lot to learn, but I'm really enjoying those opportunities. And as I said, it's something that I've always wanted to do.
What type of questions do you receive before, or what do people ask you?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are very interested in gratitude. It's something I always talk about, and I suppose I think gratitude is a hugely powerful emotion. It outweighs all negative emotions, and what I mean by that is I think it's very difficult to be angry and grateful, or sad and grateful, or jealous and grateful, and so. It's one of the most important habits that I've developed in order to deal with my disability, and that's something I always talk about. So gratitude is a big one that people like to hear about. Resilience, which is one that I've already talked about. Making failure my friend, I suppose, which is similar to that. Obviously, sharing my story and some of the kind of practical examples that I've lived through. And then, my kind of hopes and dreams for the future and setbacks and how I deal with them. I think they're the main topics that I like to talk about. And I usually do a Q&A then at the end of most of my talks. And sometimes I get very difficult questions that I'm not really able for, but I'm learning to, adapt to that and try and prepare better. And it's always very enjoyable. I like doing it, and think that hope that I'm improving.
So any listeners out there who have companies or individuals who'd want Colin to come and talk with them, what's the www? How do they get in contact with you?
ColinJudge.ie is my website. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. ColinJudge@hotmail.com is my email address. Whatever way you want to get through to me, I'd be very happy to talk.
That's great. Just about gratitude, can I bring you back to that? And it's a word that's thrown around, and what I'd love to know, and we know each other a little bit, is to, not every day can be a bright day for anyone. And also there's chemical imbalances in the body and stuff like that. And so what technique have you developed if you get up and you say, I'm finding this difficult. Like you shared with me that you were in Shanghai. So how you get to Shanghai, how you navigate the airport, it's hard for me. And I'm not, I don't have your disability in that sense. So how do you stop yourself and say, okay, I'm having a bad moment here. How do I pull myself back? Is there a technique, or just to share with the listeners, because that's probably the key on one level, and it must be very difficult, or can be difficult to do.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think from a young age, since I started playing table tennis and competing internationally, I suppose I've been exposed to lots of different people from all walks of life. And when I attended St. Michael's College, I kind of looked at the other guys in my year, and as if they had so much more than me. They had 2 arms and 2 legs. They were running around and doing anything that they wanted. And I suppose we're all very privileged going to St. Michael's, but I always felt that I was hard done by, and I compared myself to them. But then when I started getting involved in table tennis, and in particular para table tennis, I started to see other guys with disabilities much worse than my own. And then I quickly realized how much that I had to be grateful for. And as I said, table tennis made me realize that for all the things that I couldn't do, there was a hell of a lot that I could do. And, there's a lot of people that can do an awful lot less than me. And, when I think back to my first competition in Paris, I remember seeing a guy playing table tennis with no arms and no legs. He was playing with his mouth. And, that really struck a chord with me. I'd never seen somebody like that. And, ever since then, I've thought back to that story that, no matter how difficult things are for me, or, no matter what I'm going through, you don't have to look very far to see someone an awful lot worse off. And I think it's like what my uncle once told me. I think when the chips are down and when the cards are out on the table, you're very quick to take your own back. And ever since I've seen that, I've just been very grateful for what I have. I have one arm. I could have been born with no arms and no legs. And no matter how difficult things are, there's so many people in the world that have it so much worse. And when I think of it like that, I just kind of put my head down and dig deep and get through whatever it is that I'm going through.
So advice for the 22-year-old or the 18-year-old whose life has been shut down at the moment, and they not having those experiences that they thought they might be having. Is there anything simple you can say, guys and girls? Listen, here's how you might start. I'm just, and for everybody. Everybody's different because everybody isn't and you had a journey obviously to get to the philosophy and to accept it and live it on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, I think some very good advice and something that I've had to really adhere to during the corona is, to be active, there might be a lot of different things that you can't do, but there's always something that you can do. And, I think my most difficult days are those days where I'm sitting in my room doing very little and feeling sorry for myself. And I think if someone has too much time to think about themselves and their situation, they're going to find it very difficult. But if you plan out your day, you've a number of different things that you can do. And I know we're quite restricted at the moment, but I don't think you don't have to think very hard to, there's so many opportunities out there. There's so many courses online that you can upskill. You can listen to music, you can read, you can go out for a walk, you can do a workout. They're all things that are really important to me. And obviously I'm very lucky to have a goal of the Paralympics, but if I didn't do that, I'd always make sure that my day was full or as full as it could be. And I think that's another thing. I think, if you overthink your situation, you can always feel sorry for yourself. There's always something that could be better. And so I think too much, it's good to have time to yourself, but I think the best advice that I could give young people is to be active. That doesn't mean you have to play a sport. Doesn't mean that you have to read a book, but I suppose it means that you should find something that keeps you occupied. Physical and mental well-being, I think it's hugely important. And that's probably the most practical advice that I could give for someone who's struggling.
Okay, coming on to disability, what's Ireland? Ireland as a nation, where do we rank compared to other countries who've been about if you have a disability? Do you want to? And I want to hear give it out as to what.
I think somewhere in the middle, I would say. Obviously, accessibility has improved a lot in this country, but I think still could be a lot better. There's a lot of buildings in the city that I can't access in my wheelchair. The train is still an issue. There's no ramps on the train. That's just an example of accessibility. I get the train nearly every day, and I still need somebody to help me on. So that's obviously difficult for a disabled person. There's not always someone on hand to help. I think the attitude, though, to disability is probably something that can improve. I think, and I was very lucky, with St. Michael's College and UCD and KPMG. They were hugely supportive of me, and there wasn't any sort of prejudice towards me because I was disabled. But I suppose I have a lot of friends with disabilities, and I know it's very difficult for someone with a disability to get a job, for example. I think there's that sort of stigma towards disabled people that because they're physically handicapped, that they're maybe less mentally capable as well, which is just, it's not true at all. And I think that sort of attitude, that old-fashioned attitude that, sometimes I'd be on the bus and an old woman would come up to me and, she would mean the best, but, she would say something like, God bless you, or how do you do it? Or things like this. And, obviously she means that in the best way possible, but that's, I suppose, a little bit condescending, and people with disabilities, a lot of them would take that quite badly. And so I think, it's probably the attitude towards disability. And, that's another thing that through my talks and hopefully my achievements at maybe the Paralympics and then getting back into actuary. And, I suppose my big hope is to achieve those goals and to show people that my disability hasn't held me back, and that despite being born with one arm and no legs, that I've still gone out there and given it everything and achieved everything that I said that I would.
And other countries you've traveled to, who would you say this they've got it, or they're provided for the support, or make it easier, or
I don't think there's any country that has it perfect. Definitely not. I mean, I think there's less than 1% of the world with a disability. So we're still very much a minority. And worldwide, I think there's something that can be improved in every country. Obviously, countries like the US are extremely accessible, much more so than Ireland. And obviously the UK is very good as well. There's huge support for Paralympic athletes and people with a disability, which obviously that can also be improved upon here. But yeah, I mean, I think Ireland, it's improving all the time on that issue, on that. But I think there needs to be people like myself and my teammates on the Paralympic team. I think we all try and put ourselves out there and just show people that just because we're disabled, it doesn't mean that we can't do this, that, or the other. That in actuality, we can maybe do a lot more than an able-bodied person could. And so I don't think that we should be judged based on how we were born or what's happened to us. I think we should be judged for how we show up.
I suppose that's, everybody has to show up. Isn't that what it's about? Whether you're able-bodied or disabled.
That's it.
In that sense. And tell me about your was it, you were in Shanghai playing, was it 2019, wasn't it? 2019?
I got out of there just in time, yes.
Tell me about that, and just how like disabled sport is supported in China, and just traveling there and getting off the plane. And I'm curious about, you get off the plane, there's some English obviously in your foreign country, and you've got to get from A to Z. It just brings a typical kind of, because you don't have a team of people like Roger Federer or around you. It's you and your wheelchair, your table tennis bats, your luggage, passport, and a few bob to get you through, and then you've got to navigate. Do you want to bring us through that? I'm curious.
My trips to China, they've been some of the best experiences that I've ever had. Not only from an independence point of view. I think, if someone had said to me back when I was 12 or 13 that I'd be traveling to China on my own, I would have laughed at them. So I think the first thing is to say, it shows that what's possible, and I suppose how far I've came despite my disability. So I think the fact that I could even just go to China and come back and no disasters happen, I think that was a success in itself. But yeah, I mean, from a table tennis point of view, it's a different world, it's just mind-boggling the amount of people that play table tennis, firstly, and the level that they play at. It's something to behold, really. Like, I remember my first day in Shanghai, I went down to one of the clubs, and the coaches, they started me with guys my age, 25, 26, and I literally couldn't keep the ball on the table. Like, so fast, so powerful, I didn't know what had hit me. And so then I remember in the second session, I was training with 12, 13-year-old girls that could barely see over the table. And I was really struggling then as well. So I think that just shows you the strength and depth and how important table tennis is over there. Like, it's really, I suppose I felt at home in one way, but then I felt very alone in another. Like, it is a very different culture. Like, they're very much tunnel vision, and if you have any sort of talent or promise, you're more or less locked away in a center, and table tennis is your job for the foreseeable. And obviously it's a different world over here, but yeah, I feel like I learned a lot from the Chinese. That there is no secret. That's probably the most important thing that I realized. They don't do anything special. They just put the hard work in. and they do it on a different level to the rest of the world, and that's why they've won 10 times as many Olympic medals as any other country. It's as simple as that. So yeah, it was an unbelievable experience from that point of view. And then obviously seeing the Great Wall and different Tiananmen Square, is that the name?
Tiananmen Square.
Tiananmen, yeah, I should know that. Yeah, it was amazing from a tourist point of view. Even though I won a bronze medal, so the Germans call me a tourist. It's not completely true. I know I went to see the Great Wall, but I also won a medal. So that's right.
I sense once you qualify for Tokyo and then you're on the podium, you'll be sending a note to some Germans about being a tourist or not tourist. I think just would you bring through your training regime, because I'm conscious that you've limited access. Because table tennis is a minority sport, and obviously, and then with lockdown, that's again. So I know you were, if I'm right, you were at home, and you practice. Is it 100 serves?
Well, more.
No, but at a go, tell me about because it's all about table, like any racket sport. It's about the mistake you make. So it's to eradicate any chance of making a mistake. So how do you do that? Just to give the listeners a sense of that forensic approach in training.
Definitely, yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say, like, obviously I was very frustrated when the pandemic struck and I could no longer go to the club and train with my teammates. And, I suppose looking at it at the beginning, I thought, well, I can't train for the foreseeable. I can't do anything really to improve my game. But it turns out I was very, very wrong. And probably during the first lockdown, when I had absolutely no access to a table tennis club, that was probably the period where I improved the most. And it was more a mindset thing more than anything else. Obviously, yeah, like I said, I got a table in my house and I practiced my serve, which is something that I always neglected because I just find it very boring and not very enjoyable. But, I quickly learned how important serve is in table tennis. It's the most important shot. And, I really reaped the benefits when I did return to practice. But yeah, I mean, it was really, really boring at the start, but it's like anything. Once you start to see a little bit of progress, suddenly you start to enjoy it a whole lot more. And so I was very regimented. I used to practice my serve for 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon. It doesn't sound like a lot, but believe me, when all you're doing is hitting the ball one way for 20 minutes, it feels like a very, very long time. And that's probably why I never bothered to do it pre-COVID. But yeah, like you said, I used to take 100 balls, and I used to have little targets on the other side of the table, and I could see day by day, literally, nearly always improvement, by one or two, and that's all it takes. And yeah, then by the end of the pandemic, I was nearly able to hit whatever spot on the table that I wanted to, and like that was something that I never thought of doing or never wanted to do. But now that I can train in the club, I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to continue my training. I always make sure to serve for 15 minutes every day, and so that's a big lesson that I learned, that sometimes it's the most simple things that carry the most weight and are the most important and beneficial. But another thing that I really honed in on during the first lockdown was technical and tactical analysis. So my coach and I would have always recorded my matches and maybe the matches of other players that I compete against. And we had all the videos saved on our phone, but life was too busy pre-COVID, and I suppose we never really had the time to look at them in much detail. And so suddenly we had an awful lot of time. And yeah, we started watching the videos together on Zoom. And yeah, it's amazing how much I learned from that, not only from my own point of view and my own technique and how I played and how I could play better, but I also learned a lot about my opponents that I'd never really noticed before. It's amazing when you're under that pressure and you're so preoccupied with trying to win, you forget about some of the most simple things. And so, yeah, I feel those are two big things that have been hugely beneficial to me coming out of the pandemic. And I think that when I do get my opportunity to start competing again, I think they're things that will definitely stand to me. And so I suppose, the lesson or the thing that I'd like to say coming out of the pandemic, it's always how you adapt to these situations. And there's always going to be tough times and negatives, but you have to try and turn them into a positive and make the most of every situation. And I think that's what I've done. I'm very happy with how I've coped with the pandemic. I think I've made the most of the time, and I'm feeling stronger than ever now as we're coming to the end of it.
That's great. And let's come. So the Paralympics is going to be in September.
Beginning of August. It'll run probably into September. Yeah.
Okay. So you come back with a medal, hopefully gold.
That's the plan.
1, 2. So then, what happens for Colin after that? And maybe I'm going to change the question. Colin leaving KPMG to Colin coming back with the medal. What's changed? How have you grown? What's changed? How would you compare and contrast yourself?
I think I've learned an awful lot about myself. I suppose I've really focused on myself during this pandemic. It's not only been positive from a table tennis point of view, I've also upskilled a lot in different areas. My motivational speaking, I'm quite interested in digital marketing and sales. So I've done a lot of courses around that. I've improved my Spanish, which is something I've let go for many years and something that I'm very happy I've taken up again. I've reached out to a lot of my friends. We're closer than we ever were before. I think pre-COVID, nobody really had time for anything, or that was certainly the way for me. And, I wouldn't have talked to a lot of my very close friends in a long time, but now we always keep in touch. And I think probably the last thing I'd say is my hobbies. I've really focused on that because, we obviously all have a lot of time during this pandemic. And, even though I love table tennis, I train 15 to 20 hours every week. And sometimes I do get sick of it and quite frustrated and start to hate it in some ways. But I think the pandemic has made me understand the importance of balance. And I've tried to make my day as full as possible. I always like to listen to music, read my book, go out to push my wheelchair. I've swam in the sea. I always try and do different things that I enjoy that aren't table tennis. And then the effect that has is that I'm a lot more energized. I enjoy my table tennis a lot more. And when it does come down to practice, then I'm ready for it and I give it my all. And then I switch off again.
Great. And I'm going to ask you a couple of sub-questions. So what's your favorite food?
Favorite food? Pizza.
Pizza.
Not very healthy for an athlete, but sure. What can you do? It's nice.
What about socializing? What's your favorite? How to socialize?
Well, I suppose now my favorite would be to go for a walk in the park. But my favorite thing to do before the pandemic would have been very different to that. But I still, I suppose before the pandemic, I loved going out for a pint, even though as an athlete, it's not something that I get to do very often. But I suppose going out to the park, there's advantages to that when it's not raining or windy or cold, which it often is in Ireland. But that's something healthier and something.
And I know you love your swimming, so I know you used to do swim and used to do lots, and now were swimming a little bit in the sea.
The sea,
and I know
yes.
Did you have a maybe slightly difficult swim? Or am I allowed to ask about that? One of them.
Yeah. I told you about that, James, didn't I? Yeah. I forgot that I told you. Yeah, I had an incident there during the summer. The water was so cold, and I went out very far because I kind of fancied myself as a good swimmer. And there wasn't a bother until I got out of the water, and I felt like I'd had 10 points. I nearly collapsed. The color just went from my face. I couldn't heat up. I felt dizzy. Don't know what happened to me. They had to cover me. The lifeguard had to rush over to me and cover me in tin foil. And and the next thing, I woke up in about an hour's time, and I was fine. I had about 3 cups of coffee, and I went home. But after that, I said I'll never go swimming again without a wetsuit. So that's really made a difference.
Okay. So you do know some of your limits now.
Oh, absolutely. I've always known that I have limits. I just tend to ignore them sometimes, and that's probably not a good thing to do.
Well, maybe all of us are a bit comfortable in our limits sometimes. So I think there's a balance.
That's the child inside me,
There's a balance about it. But Colin, I'm conscious of your time. I really want to thank you so much for speaking to me and obviously to listeners. And we will be rooting for you come August. Fingers crossed. And then really looking forward to see what's next in post Paralympic champion. And what is at 25? You have a lot of your life to live going forward.
Absolutely, James. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to the next time. Hopefully, we can do another interview post Tokyo, and I might have more to talk about, more stories to share.
Well, absolutely, be delighted to do that. Listen, Colin, thanks very much. Really appreciate you coming aboard.
Thanks for listening.
Okay. Thank you for listening to the Career Scoop, brought to you by Elevate Career Advice and Elevate Executive Selection, Dublin and Bermuda. I'm James Fitzsimons, and I hope you've enjoyed listening. Join us next week for another great episode of the Career Scoop. Hope to see you there.